So moving on to the next segment, as we think about where we want to drive prioritization around security and data privacy projects, whether it's Gartner, whether it's Forrester, whether it's a million other, research houses, technically speaking, these are the things that really do come to mind and is backed by research, right? So if we set the stage and looking at the broader investment ecosystem, right, where are companies looking to spend their money, and look where are teams looking to spend their time, both planned and unplanned in nature, we really take a look at these top few initiatives, right? Typical security and data privacy program spend is usually formalized, right, around a multi-year cybersecurity data privacy program of some sort. We also have unplanned activities that take place throughout the year as well. Certainly this year has been a bit unpredictable, but every year seems to have its own flavor of unpredictability. And then many of us, depending on where some of you, the listeners and participants are, certainly take place indirectly or indirectly supporting business initiatives, whether they be business transformation initiatives, acquisitions, divestitures, or just running running our respective IT and security functions as well. Each one of these, interestingly enough, right, depending on the overall maturity and the segment that you operate in, could be a simple project, relatively simple project, to a multi-phase program, right? And I think that's the interesting aspect of this, because really it depends on the complexity and the distribution of the business, your appetite for risk, which will be a theme as we continue our conversations today. But the fact of the matter is, each one of these in itself is a pretty meaty undertaking. Coincidentally enough, whether or not you respond or subscribe to the NIST framework as part of your overall cybersecurity posture, these conveniently fall into each of the five phases, right, or segments, right, whether it's to identify, protect, detect, respond through recovery. We very quickly dive into them, just real brief, just speak a little bit about kind of where we are, overall from ecosystem, and certainly share some perspectives. Securing the remote workforce, certainly that's been, I believe, on everybody's mind and everybody's radar here, certainly accelerated by COVID. That will continue to increase the velocity through which we'll have a distributed workforce, not only in our industry from a hospitality point of view, but many other industries is backed by data, certainly is going to continue to increase, right? That coupled with, massive velocity in cloud adoption and various other facets of transformation will create a pretty complex environment to try to secure and manage risks. So that'll continue on, I believe, for the next several years. Risk-based vulnerability management. So this has been talked about probably about 12-ish or so months ago, is really starting up and really gaining adoption. Certainly we've adopted this practice and saw massive reduction in how we focus and where we focus on vulnerabilities, right? So certainly whether you adopt one of the many technologies out there, or when adopting a change in process, or a combination of both, certainly there's value there. And that's the undertaking from a cultural point of view, and driving sustainability and maintaining that particular posture. That shouldn't be understated. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. The notion of XDR, obviously the topic of conversation today. There's various facets of XDR, and I'll let Gilad certainly talk a little bit more about that later on. Cloud security posture management, right? Many of us, I'm sure, run workload in the cloud, whether it's single cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. The nature of understanding and maintaining controls over users and data and configuration postures, that's only going to increase. As we've seen certain breaches that have been publicized due to misconfigured S3 buckets, for example, or other, configuration anomalies, having layers upon layers upon layers and understanding how you leverage defensive depth will certainly help you continue to manage risk. And again, that'll be a topic throughout this particular conversations. Cloud access controls, CASB, right? Very, very much related, certainly around how we understand where our data goes and kind of, ensure what's authorized, what's unauthorized, whether it's data that you own within your data center, whether it's data you manage in a cloud environment, or if it's data that a third party runs on your behalf. Ultimately, you have to look at the chain of accountability and certainly the degree of risk that a particular company tends to take on with respect to these relationships. Won't spend a ton of time talking about DMARC. Those of us that run technology practices and security practices, the whole notion of spam management and email trust is a huge, huge issue. The fact that many of us use third parties for marketing and communications management and how we engage our customers, further makes this a bit of a murky topic, but I certainly believe within the next 12 to 15 months, I believe companies will take things much more seriously around DMARC and trying to drive authenticity in mail messages to further reduce proliferation of vulnerabilities and exploits via email, right? Certainly passwordless and digital identity management has been on fire the past couple of years. And, certainly the way I would view it and the way we're taking it from a window destinations point of view is how do we take what we've done with digital identity management, whether it be single sign-on or provisioning or deprovisioning or automation, how do we bring that out to the customer base, right? So all the benefits around what single sign-on and identity management, whether it's federated or not, brings to the table around security, around trust and authentication. How do you extend that to some of your customers and some of your customer servicing components to help drive, again, further support to your business, but also reduce risk while you're doing it by reducing customer friction? Data classification and protection, certainly, if many of you have not endeavored upon this due to some of the rules and regs out there in the US around CCPA or GDPR internationally, it's kind of hard to understand how to classify your data unless you discover it. So there's a whole iceberg beneath this particular topic that's probably worth a whole separate webinar and conversation. Workforce competency. So certainly we've seen, massive, again, shifts in work from home. And that then affords us the ability now to understand and how we change and how we source where we pull our talent from as we grow in some cases and contract in others. Firmly believe that as we start understanding where and how workforce distribution starts changing due to work from home, really want to make sure that, training and competency and scaling really continues. And whether that's through your education and awareness program, depending on what's part of your cybersecurity program, or if this branches out to how we do our training and how we, have our career growth and how we make what we do exciting to retain and grow our talent. Certainly the whole notion of competencies, I believe, is going to start gaining much more scrutiny and much more focus because, again, the whole remote workforce and the potential permanence of it is going to give it a bit more oomph. And then automating security risk assessments. Certainly this, whether it's third-party risk or your own internal risk, the whole notion of pairing together a global risk assessment framework with your own technology-based risk assessment framework and chaining it all together, the sheer workload around automating that or really keeping tabs on where you want to focus risk mitigation is going to force some folks to really reevaluate how they manage. And all this while executing cybersecurity priorities and roadmap, addressing end of life and technology that I'm sure many of you on the call still have to do, right? We still got to upgrade firewalls. We still have to consolidate. We still have to respond back to our business, trying to drive, again, transformation and opportunities. And certainly COVID, right? I mean, in some cases, COVID has caused us as a hospitality company to contract, certainly quite a bit. But in other cases, we've accelerated certain digital initiatives that we had to do in order to help drive, again, additional customer penetration and customer satisfaction and trying to drive additional usage of our products and services. So, COVID is kind of a double-edged sword. Part of it created an opportunity that was negative and part of it created an opportunity that was positive. And then being asked to do more with less. Certainly it's come up at least a couple of times so far. And I think that'll be a theme, as we move forward, really relying on automation and orchestration as a fundamental component of your toolkit versus something that's a nice to have or something that's a bolt-on. Largely because devices and endpoints diversities are increasing, whether it's through cloud adoption, whether it's through technology acquisition, whether it's through servicing partner acquisitions with third parties, that largely falls outside the scope of the direct control of IT and security professionals. Certainly that all lends itself to the continuous evolution of threats. And then, last but not least, all this while having a distributed workforce where now you're contending with talent pool shortages because in many cases, companies are starting to recruit and reach out to individuals and offer them employment and try to recruit them to join their companies. And there's no more relocation requirements for many cases. And that really fundamentally changes the labor arbitrage that we have in this country. I mean, I firmly see we'll see more and more work on that here in the coming weeks and months on how companies certainly grapple to maintain and grow their talent pool in some cases. Certainly a lot going on in this particular space. Moving on. So if we look at overall how how we deliver projects matter almost as much, if not more, than what we deliver. right? I know some of this may seem like common sense, but just setting the stage, right? Focus must be maintained on sustainability, cultural integration of any technology process, including security, cybersecurity, or data privacy. So regardless of fit or function, the way I typically end up working with our organization is there's really 6 key things that we take a look at that every technology solution or service, again, including information security, cybersecurity, and data privacy, really have to be able to deliver in order to be considered to be part of the tool set, excuse me. First and foremost, right, improve protection, detection, response. I mean, certainly this aligns with some of the data that you've seen, and certainly some of the data that you all have lived day to day in running your respective practices and being members of various support organizations, right? Automation is going to be critical in escaping the gravitational pull of data, right? It's just not going to be a nice to have anymore. It's got to enhance the overall productivity of operational staff, right? Eliminate, automate, orchestrate, all those things are great, but ultimately, if you're bringing in new technologies and your folks aren't equipped to be able to leverage them fully versus 3 or 4, percent or 10 or 20% or 30 or 40%, ultimately you're creating yourself and your company and your team a massive, massive disservice. We also have to look to lower our cost of ownership. As some of the previous survey data has indicated, and what many of you probably already know, the reality is, budgets are going to be going down, right? We're near the era where self-funding is almost becoming mandatory. And certainly within my organization and our team members in our company, we really look to prioritize spend where we can self-fund. It's a great story. Hey, I'm going to bring in a tool that can potentially provide XYZ value, and here's the offset, right? Total cost of ownership, by the way, can come in terms of hard dollars. It can come in risk offsets, but something certainly tangible. The tools and platforms and services have to operate in a distributed and heterogeneous ecosystem, right? We're to the point, we have been quite some time where we have on-premise, we have cloud, we have hybrid, we have third parties. That's just going to continue to complicate, and the interdependencies between all those services is going to increase the velocity of threats and risks and issues that we start seeing. Certain human capital capabilities and services construct, right? So we bring in a tool, try to reach out support, people can't use it, or you got some great thought leadership and you could bring things in, but you really can't scale it and grow it because either the third parties aren't really adept at using the tool, or the tool isn't easily supportable, or it doesn't lend itself to be integrated into a company's overall tools ecosystem. And then lastly, and again, these are no particular order because these are really matter depending on who and what is making the decision, but it's managing risk, right? The majority of the reason why the cybersecurity data privacy function exists ultimately is to manage risk. And I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways is how do we understand what our risk paradigm profiles are? And then where do we prioritize in order to address those particular risks? So those are just some things that we think about as we bring in tools. Moving on, we also think about considerations and challenges. And this is after selection and design of a product or a program or a service. And again, these are kind of generalities and macro level conversations. But when we think about deployment, obviously, on-premise, cloud, hybrid data flows, right? Lots and lots of obstacles with respect to how things interact with one another, what your budget constraints are, whether you're capital constrained, whether you're operating expense constrained, and how the data works with one another, and then ramping up. Certainly ramping up design and thought leadership has one particular vector and one speed, and then building and running and growing and tuning certainly another. So we take a look at certainly what considerations we have there. How we integrate is also super important, right? And again, if we think about the vast distribution of technologies that's out there, understanding how to integrate, whether natively through third-party APIs, how do we secure those endpoints? How do we secure the data that's flowing within it? And how do we make sure operational resilience of what we're putting in place? That's huge. And as I stated before, the constant addition of endpoints and services, that velocity is not going to go away. Matter of fact, it's going to continue to increase. Specifically for many of you in this particular webinar, that may be around large volumes of IoT devices or medical devices or other infrastructure and OT type environmental devices. So that's just going to continue to increase and grow. And then lastly, third-party considerations. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. I'm sure Gilad will mention that. Some of you may have a SOC. Some of you may have an MSSP. Some of you may have an MDR. Some of you may have parts or whole components of your security or technology ecosystem outsourced or multi-sourced or staff on. Understanding how all that's going to work together and how much control and access you need as a customer to a platform versus how much you wholly rely on that vendor's promise of delivery. That's something that's really near and dear, certainly to how we do business, and presumably for many of you as well. So moving on, as we summarize some of the pieces we've covered, we talked a little bit about top initiatives. We've talked a little bit about some of the 6 key tenets for any cybersecurity data privacy platform or service construct. Again, in addition to all the abilities, right, scalability, reliability, those are just table stakes. And then the challenges and considerations, right? What stands in our way and what do we need to be mindful of as we think on how to create these solutions? And more importantly, how do we support them and ensure that they run within our ecosystem and are sustainable?